The next morning, the peasants had just left the cottage to get back to work at the bakery. Shadow Black and Chow White they promised them that they would take good care of the house while they were out. After the pheasants left, they began to their housework by washing the breakfast dishes. The former prince washed the dishes in the sink, whereas the White Chow dried them off and placed them back in the cupboard. "You know, White Chow, I think we make a great pair," Shadow Black said. Chow White blushed, but bowed her head. Outside the cottage, King Eggman, disguised as a peddler, looked inside to see his stepson doing some chores with the Chow. "Well, Shadow Black," he said, "today is the day you will meet your fate." Shadow Black was sweeping the floors and Chow White was dusting off some of the furniture until there was a knock on the door. When he heard it said, "I'll get it," he went to answer the door. As soon as he opened, the peddler looked at the prince with a smile on his face. King Eggman disguised his voice to make it higher, so he would sound like a woman. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Shadow Black greeted. "What brings you here to the forest?" "Well, I am trying to sell my apples for people in the village, but no one wants them," the peddler said. By then Shadow Black began to feel sorry for him. "From what I heard, you must be a prince." "Well, yes," Shadow Black answered. "Well, I am in that case." "Well, in this case," she said, "I have a special apple for you." The king took out the red apple from the basket and handed it to the prince. "Have a bite out of this delicious fruit," the peddler said. While it looked really good, the prince remembered he had just ate breakfast earlier. "No, thank you," he said. "I'm not hungry." He turned down and made this peddler determined for him to eat the apple. "Nonsense, nonsense," she insisted. "Come now, you can't turn down on this nice-looking apple." Not wanting to start a debate with the elder, Shadow Black gave in. "I guess I could have a bite," he said. "That's the spirit," the peddler said as he gave it to him. Coincidentally, Chow White heard what the peddler was saying, and she knew it was none other than King Eggman. When she saw what he was doing, she hurried to Shadow Black and stopped him from eating the apple. "What is it, Chow White?" he asked his friend. She tried to warn him about the apple bite was going to be poisoned, only to be interrupted by his stepfather. "Pay no attention to that Chow, my dear," said the peddler. "Just have a bite of this apple and you won't regret it." Shadow Black looked at the apple before turning to his Chow friend. "Tell you what," he said, "I'll just take one bite of this apple and show you if it's bad or not, okay?" Even with that said, she was reluctant to give her best friend the poison apple. Chow White agreed. "Good idea. Deals," Shadow Black said, petting her head. He looked at the apple for a minute or two until he took a bite out of it. Surprisingly, though, it tasted like a normal apple. He looked to his friend and say, "See, it's not so bad." All of a sudden, Shadow Black began to feel the chunk of apple get stuck in his throat. He grabbed his throat and started to gasp for air. Chow White was then starting to get scared for the prince, whereas the peddler began to smile in a sinister smile. He tried to cough up the apple piece, but it got stuck in his throat, but it won't get out. But he was unsuccessful. He gasped for breath one last time before he collapsed to the floor, dropping the bitten apple in the process. Now fearing for his safety, Chow White checked on Shadow Black, who was now fallen into a deep sleep. King Eggman removed his peddler costume and revealed himself. "Now should be the most handsome of all the land," he declared. "He will never get in my way again. Sweet dreams, Shadow Black." He laughed evilly as he left the scene of the crime. Chow White hugged the permanently sleeped all prince while sobbing. She began to scream as loud as she could to call for help. Little did Shadow Black know, the White Chow has the ability to screech like a bat. Her screeching was so loud that it could be heard from miles away. Meanwhile, at the village, Cream, Orange, and Cheese were allowing the customers in the bakery. Suddenly, Cheese heard Chow White screeching from the distance. He got the owner's attention. "What is it, Cheese?" Cream asked. The Chow told the young rabbit that he heard Chow White cried for help, and he was also believed that Shadow Black might be in danger. "Shadow Black in danger?" Cream asked. Her pet Chow nodded his head. She was in the middle of the state of shock, but of course she couldn't give in on what Cheese was saying. "Come on, Cheese. We gotta get our friends and head home right away." They went inside the shop to tell what Cheese just heard. A few minutes later, Cream Orange, her pet Chow, and the rest of the group dashed their way and on their way back to the cottage. They were so worried for Shadow Black and his safety. Once they made it back home and opened the door, they saw a terrible sight. They saw the prince lying down on the floor asleep. Chow White was crying, and an apple had been bitten. The poor Chow was crying for help what seemed to be like hours. She was so devastated about what happened to her dear friend. When Amy walked up to her, she said, "Chow White, what happened? Why is Shadow Black on the floor?" Chow White spoke rapidly with a heart broken that the peasants can barely understand her. "Slow down, Chow White," Tails said. "Can you tell us what happened?" Chow White took a few deep breaths, and then she explained again. They also had an experience with the Chow, who were able to understand what Chow White was saying. "You tried to warn Shadow about the apple, but King Eggman made him do this?" Tails asked. She nodded her head and started to cry. Cheese hugged Chow White to comfort her. Cream got down on her knees and hugged both Chows, seeing that there was a little creatures that could break the young rabbit's heart. Anyway, she comforted both Chows and then gave him a bit of hope. "Don't worry, Chow White," Cream said. "We'll get him out of it. I'm sure we will." Because an apple chunk got lodged in his throat, Shadow Black is snoring louder than the previous night. Once they put the sleeping prince onto Lavinia's bed, the peasants had him lying down on his back with his hands folded. They began to think of how they could wake him up from his enchanted slumber. Sonic said, "Since you managed to wake him up with your mystical melody last night, why don't you try that again, Lavinia?" "Okay," Lavinia said as she summoned the same transfer flute. "Here goes nothing." She began to play the mystical melody, hoping to wake up the sleeping prince. Shadow Black, however, the prince kept snoring. "Strange," Lavinia said. "It worked last night." They tried other plans on trying to get the prince out of his slumber. At first they tickled his feet, but that didn't work. Next they shook the black cat's bed, but that didn't work either. Finally they took a bucket of cold water and poured on his head. At last Shadow Black just kept snoring away. "Nothing we do seems to be working," Knuckles groaned. "What should we do?" "I guess we're gonna have to wait till he wakes up," Sonic suggested, shrugging his shoulders. As the prince continued to sleep, Shadow the Hedgehog continued to read. "They waited and waited," he said as the time progressed, "day after day, week after week, month after month, and the poor prince continued to sleep." Shadow Black kept on sleeping, but his snoring was not as loud as a few weeks ago. Chow White had to give him the reassuring squeeze before she got out of bed. Chow White made a promise to herself that she would never leave her beloved friend beside. The ultimate life form, she firm said. She began to build a Chow cocoon so she could be with the prince for a long time. But she built a cocoon around herself. As soon as she was done, she began her long rest and hoped the day the curse would be lifted and Shadow Black would be awoken.